In the summer of 1937, J.D. Walkup was Flagstaff's golden boy. A prominent politician, social powerhouse. His wife Marie was a devoted mother of four who was as invisible as her husband was eye-catching. Until the day a note that said just, "No milk today," was found on the porch of their perfect little home. Inside, a scene of meticulous, almost lovingly staged horror. Today we're in Flagstaff, Arizona to trace a very public life and a quiet, devastating tragedy. These kinds of cases I find especially interesting. I think I guess it's the psychology of it, right? We live in close proximity in families. We all do. There are moments of conflict. Some of them are more severe than others, but the vast majority of the time, it doesn't end in tragedy. So when it does, I don't know about you, but I automatically want to know why. Fathers become family annihilators often enough that, we're used to it. They're who you'd usually expect to be the perpetrator. In this case, though, it's not the father. It's the mother. Marie Walkup, formerly Marie Green, Thelma Marie Green, technically, though she preferred Marie. I think I prefer Marie, too. Not to throw any shade on you Thelmas out there. Marie moved to Flagstaff with her family when she was just 11 years old. Not a lot is known about her childhood except that she had two siblings, a brother and a sister. I don't know why specifically the Greens moved to Flagstaff, but in 1916 when they came, it was a town that was full of promise. It was a growing place with a lot of opportunity for young family men. It was known as the City of Seven Wonders because it was close to so many natural attractions, including the Grand Canyon. It still is, actually. They haven't moved the canyon. In the 1800s, Edward Fitzgerald Beale and his men built a wagon road. Another Edward, this one, Edward Whipple, built a saloon on the road in 1871, right on the site that is now occupied by Flagstaff City Hall. And that pretty much got the ball rolling because once you have a saloon, pretty much anything is possible. Flagstaff has a pretty interesting history, but I don't want to get too off track here. So if you're looking for more context, pick up Susan Johnson's book on the Walkup family murders. In this, she goes into a lot more detail about Flagstaff at the time. It's the main source for my research. You'll find a link for it in the description below. Back to Marie Green, who, like I said, arrived as a child in about 1916. Marie's future husband, James Douglas Walkup, known as J.D., didn't show up until much later. He was born in Nashville, Tennessee in 1899 and moved to Flagstaff after completing his World War I military service. His lungs had been damaged by toxic gas in the war, and Flagstaff, with its clean mountain air, seemed like a great place to recover. It was also a good place for J.D.'s growing ambition. In the early 1920s, his name started popping up in the pages of the local newspaper, the Coconino Sun. He made the front page more than once, including when he was made commander of the local howitzer post. But then again, they crammed an awful lot of stuff onto the front page in those days. He appeared on the society page as somebody who attended all the local parties. J.D. even got some press by playing shortstop for a baseball team called the Cannibals. The team was founded by J.D.'s employer, the Babbitt brothers. The Babbitt brothers were five brothers from Ohio who were important players in the origins of Flagstaff. They started off with cattle, and they found success with trading posts and general stores along with other things. They had a lot of businesses, and they're still here. J.D. and Marie most likely met through work, since Marie was thought to have clerked at a Babbitt brothers location also. I don't know if it was this one, but this is one of the Babbitt brothers' remaining businesses here in Flagstaff. I'm assuming the couple met at work because it's unlikely that J.D. and Marie would have met at any of these social events. J.D. is mentioned frequently, but Marie Green is not really ever mentioned. Her name isn't in the society pages at all. There's no way to know if this is because she was some sort of shy homebody or if she wasn't invited. I don't know. But in a world full of teas and parties, with each one carrying a full attendance report in the paper, Marie's name was really never on the list. Her first appearance in the Sun is in a little article about her marriage to J.D. in June of 1925. In the wedding announcement, the Coconino Sun describes the couple as popular members of the Babbitt organization who had lived in Flagstaff for several years. They were married here at Federated Church or actually rather they were married in the parsonage. It was a small wedding. The only people in attendance, it seems, were the maid of honor and the best man, and that was not really unusual for the time. The wedding industry, as we know it today, had not been born yet in 1925, so it was fairly common to have small, intimate weddings. At the time of their marriage, J.D. was the manager of the Babbitt brothers' Cibecue trading post on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation, which today is known as the White Mountain Apache Reservation. Being a trader back then, it was an interesting job. The person who ran the trading post, if they did a good job, if they won the trust of the community, they would become sort of an intimate part of tribal life. Cibecue, Cibecue, I think that's how you say it in the Western Apache language. I'm sure I screwed that up, but I tried. That had been the site of a major battle between the U.S. Army and the Apache Nation during the Apache Wars. So there was, understandably, a bit of residual historical mistrust there. Cibecue is today about a 3-hour drive from Flagstaff, but for Marie and J.D., the trip started on the train. The closest city to Cibecue that had a train station would have been Holbrook, which in 1925 was still very much a rough around the edges frontier town, nothing like civilized Flagstaff. It would have been a pretty big culture shock for 20-year-old Marie when she landed at the train station on a street named Bucket of Blood Street, that's still the name of it today. Back then, though, it was really well earned, thanks to gunfights and bar brawls, and yeah, it was famous for all that kind of stuff. And then there was the trip from Holbrook to Cibecue. Oh my God, this is gorgeous out here. The walk-ups most likely would have arranged for stagecoach or wagon transport from the train station. They could have been on horseback. I mean, that wasn't unheard of at the time, especially because the roads were not paved. Even by car, it probably would have taken them a full day. Not a lot of roads in Arizona were paved. It's paved now, but it's definitely not well maintained. Still, it is an absolutely gorgeous drive out here. Look, wild horses. Cibecue is pretty rural, but it was even more so back then compared to Flagstaff. So that would have been another culture shock for young Marie. But in the isolation of the trading post, Marie probably got to spend a lot more time with her new husband than she would have if they were still in the city, because out here, Cibecue is pretty isolated. There were no clubs for him to join, no parties to go to, no meetings to attend. All he really had was the trading post and his wife. So yeah, I don't know, maybe she preferred it, or maybe not, because in September of 1926, the walk-ups moved back to Flagstaff, and when they did, they severed all ties with the Babbitt brothers. I couldn't find any particular reason why, but maybe the Babbitts wanted them to stay in Cibecue and they were just over it. I don't know. Marie was about 5 months pregnant by then, so that probably had something to do with it. Whatever the reason for the split, J.D. got a job driving a delivery truck for Frank Brooks, an entrepreneur who had his hands in a lot of different businesses. The couple rented a house somewhere around here on North LaRue, which was a much more rural road back then. Now it's a bustling walking neighborhood in downtown Flagstaff. In January of 1927, Daniel Green Walkup was born. Marie would have been 21 at the time, and J.D. had just turned 28 a few days before. Now, here's where that ambition I was talking about starts to bubble up a little bit. While he was driving the truck for Frank Brooks and taking some odd jobs on the side, J.D. was also forming a business idea of his own. In May, he announced that he was opening a soft drink factory. This would have been in direct competition with his boss, Frank Brooks, who, among other things, owned the local Coca-Cola bottler. One thing I will say for J.D., he doesn't really run from a conflict. But, I don't think Frank really had that much to worry about because J.D.'s plan didn't really go very far. There's never another mention of his soda bottling company at all after that initial announcement. The next we hear, J.D.'s working as a clerk in Switzer's hardware store in San Francisco Street. It's now an art gallery. In 1929, the Walkups moved to this little house on nearby North Agassiz Street, which has since been renamed to North W.C. Riles Street. Here is where they welcomed the birth of their second child, Rose Marie, in 1929. There had to have been some kind of worry in the family over money now that there were more mouths to feed, with the Depression taking hold. In 1931, J.D. went to work as the ranch overseer at Coyote Range, which is a property that was owned by the wealthy Colton family. Marie gave birth to her third child, John Samuel, while the family were living at the Colton Ranch. It's now part of the Museum of Northern Arizona, and it's used for weddings and other events like that. J.D. continued to immerse himself in the community. He joined all the clubs, the American Legion, the Masonic Lodge, etc. If you could join it, J.D. was a member. In 1934, he threw his hat into the local political ring, running as a Democrat for county supervisor. He did well in the primary, and thanks to the endorsement of the Coconino Sun, where his military service was really played up, he actually won the seat by a good margin. J.D. was sworn into office in January of 1935. He brought controversially strong opinions to the job, and front page exposure was a routine thing. The hardest part about making this video has been finding this spot, which I still don't know if I'm in the right place, but I'm trying to find the original location of the Flagstaff Country Club that opened in 1925, and it didn't close until 1972, but I haven't been able to find anybody who can tell me exactly where it was. I think I'm in the right place, but I don't know for sure. Golf was a growing sport back in the 30s. They had men's leagues, women's leagues, and they played on a packed dirt course. There was a large clubhouse, which is why I thought, I'd see at least ruins of something. But anyway, JD went to all the events there, or a lot of them, and it doesn't seem like his wife was ever on his arm, though, because she's never mentioned. The golf club will figure prominently in this story in the future, which is why I hope I'm in the right place. The last of the walk-up children was born here in the family's last house on North LaRue Street in November of 1935. Baby Elizabeth was nicknamed Phoebe by her siblings. Marie would have had her hands full with 4 young kids, so maybe that's why she wasn't out and about, but still, I'm pretty sure they could have afforded a babysitter every now and then. By 1937, J.D. was now the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, and he had a new office in the Monte Vista Hotel, which was a hotbed of activity. It was the center of Flagstaff life, and it was walking distance from home, which was great when he was home. But his position meant that he was spending a lot of time away from home in Phoenix. On July 22nd, 1937, J.D. had to go to Phoenix for another one of his meetings, and whether he volunteered or was recruited, he somehow was also traveling with a car full of young women from the Flagstaff softball team that were going down to Phoenix to compete in the Western Tournament, including a girl named Doris G., who you'll hear more about later. That's called dramatic foreshadowing. And this wasn't unusual. If someone was taking a long drive like to Phoenix, that they would end up carpooling with other people. He would have taken Schnebly Hill Road, which I'm driving on the only part of Schnebly Hill Road that you can actually drive on today. It's still a dirt road, still in use, pretty much only by 4-wheel drive. It's, mostly a scenic drive these days. So I can't take the bus all the way to Phoenix. I love you guys, but I'm not breaking an axle. JD would have gone all the way on Schnebly Hill Road through Sedona, Cottonwood, Prescott, down into Congress where the desert begins, and then continuing on to Phoenix. And it took 6 hours. So we know what JD's day looked like on July 22nd, 1937. He was driving and driving on this crazy road with a car full of young friends, having no idea that his entire world was about to turn upside down. There are some reports that the walk-up children were seen playing outside all that day. Marie had called the family doctor, Dr. Fronsky, sometime the previous day. She spoke to him a lot because she had a chronic stomach problem, and this time she told him that she was worried that her children may have caught it from her. Dr. Fronsky wasn't home that night when his phone rang again at 10:30 p.m. His son Robert answered and took down the message from Marie. She asked that the doctor come to her house on his rounds, but specified not tonight. Tell him not to come tonight. Tell him to come tomorrow morning. Later that night, 2 young couples out for an evening of fun and trespassing on the private property of the golf club came across something unexpected. They came across an automobile sitting on the green of the first hole with the driver's side door open. There, inside the car, dressed in a blood-soaked summer nightgown, was the body of Marie Walkup. There was a German army rifle propped next to her and a hole in her chest. She wore only one slipper
the other one discarded nearby. The young people raced back to town and summoned the sheriff, who summoned the coroner, and they came out to the scene. With Marie lying dead and JD in Phoenix, the men realized that somebody better go and check on the walk-up children.
JD was awakened by the night clerk at his hotel with an urgent message that he needed to go home immediately, and the clerk obviously knew more but wasn't going to tell JD anymore, so he called the sheriff's office, and the sheriff reluctantly told him that Marie was dead. He wouldn't say any more than that. He just told JD to hurry up and get home. So JD went home. That is, he got back on that horrible, rough dirt road, 6 hours, back all the way to Flagstaff in the dark, this time alone, just rifling through his brain trying to figure out what could have happened. Like, how could Marie be dead? When JD got back to Flagstaff, he went immediately to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff told him that Marie's death had been self-inflicted. So JD asked, of course, about the children, and that's when he found out that his entire family was gone. As they approached the house, the men saw a note pinned to the door, addressed to Dr. Fronsky. "Look inside the bedrooms," was all it said. There was also an empty milk bottle set out on the doorstep the way people did in those days. The milkman would take the empty bottle and leave you a full one, but inside the bottle was another note. This one said just, "No milk today." The door was unlocked. Everything inside the house was in order. In the kitchen, the living room, the hallway, everything looked fine. But off of the hallway were 2 doors, bedrooms. The men slowly opened the first door and saw a child's bed and a crib. In the crib was baby Elizabeth with a teddy bear tucked under her chin. Daniel, 10, occupied the bed, and he was lying there on his back peacefully. Neither child was breathing. Both had clean pajamas on, but as the men pulled back the freshly laundered covers, ugly dark bruises were visible around the necks of both children. The men had seen enough. They didn't want to go any further. Dr. Fronsky was summoned. When the doctor arrived, he went upstairs and he found Rosemary and John in their beds in the same condition. Later, at the funeral home, it was determined that all 4 of the children had been stabbed directly in the heart with what was described as a fine instrument. There was evidence that one of them, Rosemary, had awakened and struggled before succumbing. The coroner's verdict was that the children had been stabbed first, then strangled by their mother, who then committed suicide following the act. He concluded that Marie had pulled the trigger with her bare foot. The note Marie had left for her husband was reprinted, at least in part, by the Coconino Sun. She finally made its front page. It said, "Because of my lack of discipline, the children are happier to go this way. Only grief would come to them. You are strong in faith, never doubting. Mercy to my people. I love you, and I have failed."
The service was private, just like Marie had requested, though the grief was public. All of Flagstaff mourned. A lot of people sent flowers. Marie and JD's relatives came from near and far and surrounded JD with love as one large coffin and 4 little ones were buried here in Citizens Cemetery, right in the middle of Flagstaff. Though the walk-up murders disrupted Flagstaff dramatically at the time, the incident had been all but forgotten by the following year, as if the whole town had just made a pact never to mention it again. In a recap of important local events for the year 1937, July 22nd wasn't even mentioned.
Looks like somebody remembers them. JD took a break from public life, but he was back to his duties by September, and he expanded his reach and his influence, working harder than ever. He didn't appear as much on the social page. He wasn't really at the social events, and though he was still regularly featured in the pages of the Sun, the stories were about politics, about the work he was doing. He kept a low social profile until August of 1939, when it was revealed in the paper that he had remarried to a local woman. The second marriage didn't last very long, and with World War II looming, JD rejoined the war effort. He served just under 3 years in the South Pacific, where he was wounded. He returned to the U.S. permanently disabled. JD did get one more chance at love. This time his bride was Doris G. Do you remember her? My dramatic foreshadowing from before? She was a young college student in 1937, a member of the girls' softball team from Flagstaff who JD had driven to Phoenix. They re-met at some point and married in Los Angeles in 1948. Later, Doris gave birth to a son, also named James Walkup. The son very well may still be alive, but I didn't pursue that because I think the guy probably deserves his privacy. Our James, our JD, lived the rest of his life in Phoenix and died in 1972. So what happened? Marie's actions weren't impulsive. She carried out her task in a meticulous, I hate to say this, but almost a loving way. And there's no mention of anything being wrong before, except there was that stomach problem that she kept talking to the doctor about. She was so worried that her children might have it too. But I can't imagine she would remove them from the earth to protect them from something like IBS. No. But it seems likely that Marie was suffering from postpartum something. Postpartum depression can last as long as 3 years after giving birth, and baby Elizabeth was 22 months old. But postpartum depression doesn't really yield this kind of behavior. Postpartum psychosis can, though the disorder is really rare. It develops from depression in only about 1 in 1,000 women, and it rarely leads to homicide. There was the case of Andrea Yates back in the early 2000s and Lindsay Clancy more recently in 2023. That level of illness generally rears its head in the first few weeks after the child is born, though. Once it happens, it can recur at any time. According to a Boston Globe article, the defining factor for women who take things as far as Marie did is lack of social support. I think we can say pretty definitively that Marie lacked that support. Also, and this is wild, I found research that explores a connection between postpartum psychosis and stomach issues. The digestive system and the brain are connected by the gut-brain axis, and that's being studied. Immune changes that happen after pregnancy can also be involved, and if Marie had any other underlying psych issues, that would put her even more at risk. Could Marie have brought her stomach issues to the doctor, hoping to maybe open up a conversation about other darker symptoms? Dr. Fronsky described Marie basically as a hypochondriac, overreacting to her health issues when he was interviewed afterwards. Did he just shut down and not listen to her? Or did he fail to spot the real problem she was trying to talk about? Back in those times, mental illness carried even more of a stigma than it does today. I'm not saying this because it exonerates Marie. I'm just saying it to point out how dramatically this illness can turn a really good, loving, fastidious mother into a monster. Still, there's no signs that Marie sought help for the urges she was feeling. And even if my theory carries some weight, which who knows, because I'm just speculating, it still leaves the ball in Marie's court, at least to some extent. She wouldn't have been the first documented case of psychiatric issues after childbirth. That goes back to 400 BC. So if she had told somebody what was going on with her head instead of just her tummy, I would have to hope that it would have been taken seriously. All we really know is what she told JD in her note, that she believed that she had failed and that because of that failure, she had to die, taking her children with her. I can't help wondering, with the wording of it, whether she was responding to some frequent criticism from JD. I'm not blaming the victim, and clearly he was a victim of what happened, but it's possible he chided her for lack of discipline, especially given what a motivated, action-driven person he was. Andrea Yates' husband told people that all his wife needed was a swift kick in the pants before she drowned her kids. It wouldn't have been unusual for JD to say something like that, because mental illness was often seen as a lack of discipline in those days. These days, too. I'm just trying to find a why. Maybe that's a lost cause. I don't know. The biggest mystery for me in this whole thing is, why did Marie choose to take her own life in the way she did, in the place that she did, in her thin nightgown on the green of the golf club, the exclusive spot that her husband frequented when she herself was never seen there? The murders she committed were meticulous. She dressed her children in clean clothes, tucked them into fresh bedding after she committed the act, and yet she chose to go herself in a way that was so messy and so public. Was it like a final message to high society Flagstaff and to her husband, who was so much a part of it? It's another thing we'll never know. Well, there you go. That's the story. It's all I know about it anyway. I'm Mary. Join me for the next true crime travel time, where the dark, forgotten stories are the map.